Well, good evening. On behalf of Rivers Institute, I am so happy to be here tonight. This evening's gathering is a confluence of multiple streams of Rivers programming. We use the word confluence in our organization both loosely, as I do now, and more formally to describe a particular kind of durational gathering we host, a gathering of artists from across disciplines and fields of study. We were honored to learn from artists Rhizome and Clarke in our first confluence and from Will Rawls in our second, and it was through these programs that they first met one another. More broadly, Rivers is at work when we bring our communities into exchange and thereby see ideas compounded. So tonight is a particularly special evening for us because this conversation lives at the intersection of multiple relationships. Tonight is the 7th exchange in an 8-part series of conversations, listening sessions, and performances devoted to minor histories and radical resonances of Black electronic music with Ryan C. Clarke and a cohort of musicians, artists, DJs, and writers. This program, Living Equipment, is presented collaboratively with Triple Canopy, based in New York. The series began in New York and will close in September in New Orleans. And we welcome Triple Canopy's editor, Alex Proven, here tonight. This event also marks the final week of artist Will Rawls' residency with us as part of the Amistad Rivers Research Residency Program, co-organized by Rivers and Amistad Research Center and supported by the Mellon Foundation. So on behalf of all of our collaborators, we thank you for joining us this evening. Will Rawls is a multidisciplinary choreographer, dancer, and writer. In 2023, his performance and video installation Sicker toured the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, the Momentary, On the Boards, and Pica. It is currently on view in Los Angeles in a joint presentation between the ICA LA and Red Cat. He is Associate Professor of Choreography and Interdisciplinary Practice in the Department of World Arts and Culture and Dance at UCLA. Ryan C. Clarke is a tonal geologist from the southeastern banks of the Mississippi and an editor and curator of Dweller Electronics. His work has been published and presented by Rivers, Eflux, Rhizome, Burnaway, Terraforma, Harvard's Hiphop Archive Research Institute, and MoMA PS1. Finally, I open this evening's event, Power to the Parade, on the heels of a citywide power outage, a demonstration of load shedding. Many of us learned over the weekend that load shedding is a method of power control, whereby demand is intentionally disconnected from the power supply to prevent a cascading collapse of the power grid. With this context, I pass the mic to 2 artists, whom I suspect will unsettle our notions of supply and demand and the value of collapse. Will.
Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. As Andrea said, this is the 7th event of presumably 8. We have one more in September, and the previous 6 took place in New York, and it was very interesting looking out in the crowd and not knowing many faces. So to do this, to share these ideas that ultimately emerge from Southern Louisiana amongst Southern Louisianians in place, no matter where you come from, is still kind of, it's still gleaming on me. I'm still understanding it. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Will, for being here as well. A bit louder?
Yeah.
Thank you. I can definitely enunciate my voice. So I wanted to start off with 2 readings, kind of a side A and a side B, just to open this up. One is coming from Tom Dent, kind of cultural social organizer from 20th century New Orleans. He was a playwright, poet, writer, kind of reporter, anthropologist, cultural organizer, and definitely a North Star for me when it comes to New Orleanian kind of, literary canon, cosmology. He's definitely in the stars for me. And he wrote something in 1973, which I think still reads clear and could be very contemporary. And then side B will be kind of response from a kind of a scientist perspective. And to get into what Andrea said, to not bury the lead, I am part geologist, part ethnomusicologist, and I'm trying to understand the Earth as a collective subject, and it's people that are modeling, our culture is modeling off of the Earth's processes. And sometimes that can have a regional proximity. So we'll definitely get into how the Delta might be, the first parade in its potentials. But first, let me do some reading. This is a report from New Orleans. New Orleans is a weird town, now wavering in the breeze of history. An old place, one of the few towns in this country where one can look at the layers of 2 or 3 centuries in one glance. Then there is also the poised wrecking ball of progress. 150 years ago, New Orleans was a primarily black city, and it is becoming again now. The city was largely built by black people, skilled and unskilled, slave and free. It was and has always been a river city, a seaport that made it on sugar and cotton trade, and later on oil. But all that is changing now. Now the city wants to make it on reputation, that is tourism, and if possible, on the grand scale. This is the reason for the domed stadium, the largest in the world with all the problems that white folks have when they decide to build something too large. It is also the reason for new hotels and office buildings, and even for the current obsession with preservation, so the capital P. And as New Orleans wavers like a rickety old building in the winds of time and change, a young black dude thinks about it all, and then he thinks about his plans to leave. He is any young man, just turned 20, married or getting married, and he can't get a decent job if he can get one at all. He heard things might be better in LA, Chicago, or Detroit, or wherever in California his family has relatives. As for New Orleans, he wonders what progress means for him. He even wonders about the new black politicians and what they're doing for him. He sees them on TV now and then talking about this and that, but they don't touch his life as anything real. He also wonders about the rash of new movies on Canal Street with his people running around pushing dope or breaking up dope rings or being beautiful secret agents or cowboys. He wonders what that has to do with his life and livelihood. He wonders about the 2 soul radio stations, your black giant booming you the latest in news and sounds, with steady advertisements from Mr. T's jewelry store offering beautiful diamond rings and nothing down if you're getting married. He has a buddy who's got one of those rings, and they sat down one night and he figured that he'll be paying for it for at least 4 years. But the music is good when they play music. And he strolls past downtown Howard Johnson's. He notices that it might ever open again with the same stupid sign outside, this time, support your symphony orchestra, beautiful music. He wonders about Mark Essex, but not too much, because he figures that Essex just stopped wondering and decided to do something. And what he did to this day gives him a tinge of pleasure, and he could well imagine himself coming to the point where he would do the same. As New Orleans wavers in the wind, he wonders what will happen to the niggers of New Orleans. What will be their city? Will it be their city too? Will it be a city for good niggas? Or whether it will come a time when there are his people and his music, but no more niggas. Suddenly he hears Baptiste's trumpet sound the call. He feels the excitement run through his body, the same as always. The Olympia is ready. The beat, the jump, the swift movement of rhythm, the entire crowd of his people carried away into unity of motion, singleness of purpose, individuality of motion. The second line is everybody's thing together and everybody's thing for themselves. Umbrellas raised, the huge throng moves behind with the band as if convulsed into it, become a part of it, reunifying movement and sound. The drum beats echo like shots underneath the Claiborne Avenue overpass. The traffic stops before the black throng. Our dude feels like he's part of an irresistible and undeniable force. He has heard people condemn the parades, the music, the funerals, the dance, but he realizes there's something deeper, and he is a part of it. Something old and certain about what it means and what it celebrates. Something he cannot put into words. And for the first time in a really long time, he really didn't want to leave New Orleans, because as the trumpet of Wallace Davenport darts out, echoing off the sun rays, he knows there won't be anything like this in LA or Chicago or Detroit. There's something about this moment that can't be defined by money or jobs or progress or new buildings. Quickly, our dude moves closer astride the band, his umbrella up high, bobbing with him. He imagines that this parade never ends, marches right on to City Hall and through it on Monday morning, through the courts, through Parish Prison and Central Lockup, then winds its way through the library, up and down Canal Street, through Maison Blanc and Holmes, through Mr. T's taking a few diamonds along with it, right over Tulane and Broad to the police station, bursting the eardrums of the police so that their brains fly right out the side of their heads in both directions, and music oozes in to impart finally some sense.
Then there were no more niggas because the niggas were the city. What his people had learned long before him was the order and the music was the law. But he noticed that Olympia had stopped playing, the excitement had cooled down, and the good dream got lost. Soon, when the parade was over, he would have to get back to his plans to leave. So much for the weird town, this 1973rd year of the Anglo calendar, waving in the wind of history. Okay, we're flipping the record over. All right, and this one's called Soldier Boy, Child Soldier. You cannot photograph a river. What could a snapshot of motion tell you? Maps do not function for this land. Maps consider a moment as a representative across time, imposing the falsehood of truth to be rendered in the binary. That truth can be singled out. A map might consider the idea of oneness, but Louisiana wades in a state of perpetual incompleteness. Maps do not function for this land. The Western image understands itself through dimensionality that refuses the insistence of time. This is how it's always been. Western theory only knows the solo on the tempered measure scale, navel-gazy timekeepers assuming their projection as the horizon line. Here is a field recording of assembly and erosion, displacement and self-possession in motion, depositional decision to localize after imposed individuation. An insurgent sedimentological art ensemble. Diaspora from down upriver converge for one more group solo. Dirt of the earth, traveling in the break, sounding out low-end theories of subaltern submergence, parade of salt and soil form, between two worlds through seasonal rhythmic procession, each lobe signifying on the continental shelf as its own crew. Congregation, flood, ebb, flow, avulsion, syncretic synthesis, plurality of origin, paradox of source, and dispersal are deltaic models reflected in our cultural values, the truth marching in storm surge. The parade is a black song, a break, a percussion interlude, a moment of truth making its transition. Deep cultural meaning in the break is rooted in Western African spirituality and linguistics. Is the break the talking drum calling our names we've lost long ago? The American South should be realized as an ongoing futurity event. Let the West Indies tell it, the canary is the coal mine. What man didn't account for in his ledgers was the capacity of the rendered other to metabolize multiple apocalypses. Like the land itself, it insists on another way to comprehend space and time, beyond linearity, another line, a second line. Not adhering to the map is the refusal to the commodity object. Post-industrialization turned a port city known for its knowledges and establishing new methods of navigation into a guided tour selling scriptures of diminished returns on a culture that needs the replenishment of new land each river year. The anvil of articulation. To wring meaning from meaningless suffering, I know. Senselessness is a form of encryption too, though, even an elaborate ruse. The choreography of alias, masking tradition, clowning, minstrelsy, double speak, act out in the open, but it's communication for those who know. Black music holds a triple consciousness on any given Sunday, a dialogue, a declaration, and a joke. Zulu comes to mind. How have we learned to whisper our secrets out loud? Even now, do you hear me? Morse code to the spiritual eternal, satire, better known as the concrete pun. The Black church knows how to play in their faces pretty well, performing African existentialism through Western-approved forms. This term is a social navigation best described in the book Spiritual Churches of New Orleans. A concrete pun refers to the psychological reconciliation between religions that carry two belief systems. Voodoo and Catholicism, for example, are synthesized in spiritual churches. The mingling of European and African beliefs constructed a reasoned analogy or ruse or mask to allow Africans to maintain their own beliefs. For example, the snake in St. Patrick, whose European mythology has him running all the snakes out of Ireland, suggests an association with the Haitian Dahomean serpent god Dembala Wedo, whose Haitian mythology holds as the creator of the world and all gods. This makes St. Patrick a husk facade to get a head nod for the real ones in the back who know while the city cracked down on voodoo people. Spiritual churches dealt with the text and subtext of both African and European belief systems through a series of cultural semantics between two worlds that had nothing to do with each other. In a city filled with as much camouflage as there is surveillance, maybe we need to return to the senselessness that sits in the head of every blues person. Black graffiti posted up in laughter of movement and on wax. Black art as black mathematics, meaning the abstract science of number, quantity, and space. Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, so there's a lot in there that was basically a notes app, a static, moment turned into something kind of coherent.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of notes there that I want to touch on. But before I get there, I first want to continue to, bring you into the space and in your work as well. So I would love to hear about a little bit of your practice and kind of like your latest things that you've been up to, and how have you been?
I've been all right. Thanks for having me, Rivers and Ryan, for being part of this 8-part series, and all the containers and branches and roots and veins that you're trying to grow in your own practice between geology and ethnomusicology and liveness and blackness and New Orleans and its connections to all the other places that you might leave, kind of like how Tom Dent says in this piece, after all this sort of fantasizing about the parade, kind of obliterating the minds of the cops and replacing their brains with sense via music, that he somehow also returns to the melancholy of thinking of going elsewhere again, and that sort of push and pull between where you're from and where you're from doesn't give you everything you need, but gives you a lot to sort of sort out for the rest of your life. So thank you for including me in that. I feel like such a tourist here because this is my 3rd time in New Orleans, and so thinking a lot about. I have a lot of family from the South, from southern Georgia, from the Okefenokee Swamp area, and so I'm familiar with the climate and the lowlands and the wetness and the intoxicating air and the heavy wet blanket, but there's a lot. It's a lot less French-esque, ish-esque,
Totally.
In Georgia. So I'm already riffing on what you read rather than talking about myself, but that's one way to do it. But I was I went to the French market and sort of picked out, I was looking through all those rings, and knickknacks, and I was kind of I saw a ring with an alien on it from the Aliens movies, and I was like, is this, if I buy this, is this New Orleans? You know what I mean? Am I unearthing some kind of witchy magic alien thing here, or am I a sucker? So I didn't buy it. But I think that
you didn't get it.
I didn't buy it, but I still have another Sunday to go back.
Right.
But I think that there's something about this kind of temptation to both unearth something here because the history is so thick and on the surface and inviting, and realizing that the ways in which the city might be starting to give itself over to tourism and stuff makes it the fantasy of unearthing very strong, but the actual engagement harder to find sometimes. So I also appreciate being here for that because you're from these parts. But let's see. I've been okay. And coming off of multiple projects. So my time here has been really about resting and recovering and kind of letting my mind wander and thinking about the swamp as a place where ideas go to kind of decompose and recompose and push up lotuses or muck, and one project that I'm coming off of is sort of a video installation, an 80-foot wall projection with immersive sound, and it's a diptych with a live performance on a stage, and so the performers that appear on stage are also in the video installation, and that's all about stop motion and capturing Black performers with photography and their gestures and the fragmentation of the body. So I think a lot about that, fragmentation of the body. If there's a lot of concepts that we've already thrown out here. So how do we pin some things?
Like a whiteboard.
Yeah, whiteboard. I know. And then I also did a performance, which was a solo inside of a retrospective for the artist Ralph Lemon, who is a choreographer and a sculptor and a video maker, multidisciplinary wizard, and the form of the performance, or I had a lot of like anecdotes and things, but the form of the performance took the shape of kind of a sad clown teacher, sort of like. So I wrote a bunch of words on the back of the wall and kind of used them as like lesson plans. So I've been in these two places, like clowning and pedagogy or something, or like teaching through the absurd, and then also like the fragmentation of the body through media, and also thinking of the swamp as a more organic way of fragmenting and composting the self.
Totally. I'm thinking a lot about stillness, also masking traditions, and what sort of dressing down can come from dressing up. Maybe another way to put that is just subversion in general. So when I'm thinking about, the vaudeville tradition, minstrelsy, but also black masking Indians here in New Orleans, it feels like mediation or abstraction back to mingling between two belief systems. I'm always pinning the European and the African together, but I didn't start that fight.
I get it.
Yeah. But yeah, I think about abstraction getting, at least in Black culture, getting to the essence of something or getting to the soul of something, like mediation, whether it's through masking or obviously we have some, sets here that's kind of like Black instrumentation, it's kind of percussive heavy, music, like cultural sound, it whittles down from the acoustic into the amplified, into the synthesized. But every point on that, at least how it feels to me, is really trying to get at the heart of something. Like, is it the texture of the guitar that makes it Black? I'm thinking about blues. Is it the voice of, like, is that where the Blackness is? Is it in the rhythms? Is it in the space between the rhythms, thinking about syncopation? Whereas in the European tradition, it seems like mediation is getting away from something. Like, it's actually creating a sort of, buffer. I'm thinking about the nature culture divide, or the supernatural and the natural. Like, the spirits aren't here with us. They're in some other realm that we, need to pay some poll tax of a belief system, not to be disrespectful, but you know what I mean. Like, it's very interesting that
It's a little bit.
it's a little bit disrespectful.
That's okay. That's
a little bit disrespectful. But but I think obviously I'm thinking about coloniality and like how certain religions were given to people who had a different sensibility of the world. And I grew up in I'm not going to go on a rant, I promise, but I grew up in the Black church, and something that I really recognized, I was in the choir, so I was really behind the preacher. And what I really found myself kind of awestruck by was how this person really played the role of, like, he was really playing a divination role. Like, he was bringing people into these different worlds. It's kind of like a sci-fi event. He's really producing this like utopic understanding, and everyone is just like locked in with wherever he's going. And he played that ceremony. Of course, you get people like speaking in tongue and kind of running around doing victory laps. And I was like, I don't see this in my other friends' churches. Like, where does one belief system stop and start? And that kind of opacity is something that I find really exciting. It's when I'm from Baton Rouge, when I moved down here, and seeing like, the parades really reaching some kind of ecstatic collective catharsis. It felt like, for many people, especially the Mardi Gras Indians, it was the mask that allowed them to really tap into something else. Whereas if they were not even themselves, but that was almost like a stronger version of themselves. And that's what I mean about the mediation. So that's a big loop to say, in your own work, particularly with the Ralph Lemon one, with the sad clown pedagogy, did you feel like you could actually get somewhere closer to what you were doing by putting on a certain mask? Or what was the mask for you? Maybe that's a better question.
Yeah, so many. So the performance happened twice. Once was during the exhibition for Ralph, and then once was almost a year before that. And I teach at UCLA. Our students were, trampled by riot cops because they had set up an encampment, to sort of ask the university to divest from Israel and its investments in that country. And so then a lot of the students stopped coming to the class after that. And so I collected all their notes and scores of projects they were working on and decided to perform those to kind of like finish the work in a performance. And that became a kind of way in which pedagogy can help feed my performing work. And I was sort of masking as them and sort of like taking on the disappointment of like the imploded classroom and also and trying to give it a little more life and not require any more labor of them, and so then that became like literally kind of drawing on the wall, like it's a chalkboard, and then I painted a sad clown face, on, because it was sort of feels like it was a way to talk about like sad young, like, I don't know, the sad clown makes me think of like young people and experiencing clowns and young, sad people, like there was somehow, it's kind of where it came from, my own sadness and disappointment at sort of accepting a job at a place that, that had just sort of shown its ass. So, so then I decided to kind of take this up again for Ralph. And so the clown, the sad clown persists right now, as a kind of form to kind of contain my disappointment and frustration and at institutions that I didn't, it's not like I had a lot of hope in them, but I think that there's a sort of, collapse of certainly the university at this time. And so, and I think separating myself from being a teacher and being a maker is harder to do. And so that sort of has just been carrying through into this clown moment with Ralph. I think that the clown face does kind of distill, like it's a sad face. So if like I try to smile with a sad face on, it kind of creates a little bit of a rupture and like a little bit of a distortion in communication. So I think you can work with a mask and then act or perform or speak in ways that go against what the mask is telling you, or you can animate whatever the mask is giving. And so playing in that space does kind of offer a distilled emotion to kind of organize other communication around. And so I think that like going back to mediation, I think that mediation, like I don't believe in, or like, one theorist said, I think it was Avital Ronell, which is a whole other story, but like that, that every act of communication is a failure to communicate. That if we are already using words and we've already somehow failed to connect just energetically by being together in silence. So I think that media, whatever it is actually addressing that failure through distortion. And that media are the distortions that connect us. Or mediation is the distortion that connects us in our search for some kind of immediacy. Which I think is why abstraction becomes useful as a way of representing the Black experience, I think, or Black experiences, because there is this distortion that's kind of built into both one's own just squirrely understanding of oneself, which is like innate in all of us, and then one's kind of navigation of what one has been born into.
I feel that lack, just the idea of lack, or like space in between, or maybe some kind of void. And instead of recognizing that void as a failure, maybe one of potential, and not one to fill or to make complete, but to maybe even just reject the idea of oneness, of completeness, which I think is an extremely, I'm really into this idea of actualizing metaphor that's coming from Caribbean theorist Sylvie Winter. Shout out Sylvie Winter. Jeez. But there's this notion that to get from 0 to 1 is by means of 2, I think is incredibly important. And to my earlier point, I think that notion is really stemming from the Earth, and everyone has their own kind of, regional mythologies, that then culture kind of like, cycles and circulates around. But this idea of what you're talking about is that void can be used as accommodation as much as it can be recognized for its own value. And then you question the idea of value, like to fill up a space, to make something complete. Is that what we're reaching for? And when I think of accommodation, I'm thinking about, again, the river coming in and depositing, I would say 12,000 years ago. So southern Louisiana is kind of at the beginning of, I'm doing a geology detour right now, but in the Holocene epoch, which was about 12,000 years ago, between then and now is the majority, like the development space for southern Louisiana. And I think it's really important to recognize that that wasn't a singular event, that it's an ongoing one, that there's no boundary between certain lobes, that it was kind of the channel of the river, because it was levee-less, which we can also talk about how colonial imposition is as much a part of the environment as it is in our environment, or just that the environment is going under colonial imposition, like at the same time as the people and the soil were both dealing with the exact same violences of the plantation, which has turned into kind of neocolonialism with the plant, going towards extraction. But I love what you're talking about in the beginning around the encampments, because I'm also trying to recognize insurgency as like an environmental condition that we can learn and model off of, right? Like the levee break, the overflow. I think the technical term would be crevasse splay. But I'm just, I don't know, the French, they went crazy down here. But I don't know. I love the idea of insurgency, or trying to get up under something. And that humor seems to play a role for you in that. Humor feels maybe inherently subversive. Like you said, like you're smiling with a sad face, like that kind of, how do I reconcile these things these feelings going in opposite directions, or I don't know, antagonistic directions, maybe. Has humor followed you, and have you found an insurgent energy in humor?
Yes.
Cool.
We're going to do the first joke I think I told you was that I took Geology 101 in college.
Yes.
And I remember just like one word. I said turbidity flow, and I started spitting out these like basic ass like geology terms to you.
Turbidity flow is kind of deep.
Turbidity flow happens off the coast.
Indeed.
Maybe in the shoals, one might say.
And Tiffany King.
Tiffany King. Sylvia Winter. We can just like build up a little.
Yes, exactly.
That was the joke. The joke was like, I took geology 101, talking to a professional geologist.
Okay.
And I think the clown is also about sort of like presenting a kind of amateurness as a way to think through the complexity of life and a filter, and so that was fun for me. And then I think that then I think about our swamps, like the swamp that is New Orleans and the swamp that I know, Okefenokee, which means the land of trembling earth, which was formed very differently than the Mississippi and Delta. Okefenokee was actually a big basin that filled up with water that eventually flowed to the sea, rather than rivers coming together and then stagnating. Period. Just tidbits about geology.
Thank you.
And then. But thinking about, sorry, what was your question? Can you give me
That's fine. That's okay. Humor as an insurgent, held an insurgent potential in your work or your practice or your life.
Maybe that just happened. I don't know.
For sure.
Or like at least failure, right, is the beginning of trying to tell a joke. Like I think what's exciting about humor is not that the punchline works, but that it might fail. And that I think that, so you're always courting failure and getting comfortable with that, and like helping the room get comfortable with your failure as a social event.
Totally.
And so I think the insurgency is at one, getting comfortable with a space where things can break and fail, and that is the language we start to speak together, or like, and then from there, then we can start to laugh.
Yeah.
And then laughter is is where like the voice and the body meet in feeling, you know, and you kind of laugh and you don't know why something is funny, or sometimes you get really clear cues about why something is funny, and then other times you don't. But the laughter comes anyway, so it's also insurgent in relationship to like the decorum of the room you're in, or kind of what you do or don't want to represent when laughing at something. And so I find it really useful to play with humor and, you know, and jokes, but also just weirdness like that. Like some jokes are like knock knock, who's there, you know, and it's like a 20-second joke. And then there are other jokes that kind of evolve over time that are more like word problems or something. Yeah. But I'm curious. Yeah, I think that for me, I'm curious, like where you find yourself kind of making yourself laugh. You know, making yourself laugh sometimes, or like where your questions kind of collide, and cause you to like giggle. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I feel like jokes and rhymes and rhythm are all kind of the same. You know, I don't produce a lot of music. I'm more of a DJ, but I feel like there's some kind of moment that when a blend happens in a really exciting way, which again, you're kind of teetering on failure openly, you know, publicly. But when something just kind of locks into place, it really does bring a certain smile and a laughter, you know, and not a relief, but definitely some kind of like reconciliation just occurred. And two things that didn't really have anything to do with each other, like they found a common space. I think a lot about it. I think about it like braiding or quilt work. That's why I love the idea of this is from I want to share names if people want to, you know, do their own research, but Michael Liris, who is another French guy, another French ethnographer, he was the one that coined the term concrete pun. And I love this. Yeah, I love this idea of a pun being used to reconcile, you know, kind of a spiritual antagonism again between Catholicism and kind of, you know, hoodoo, voodoo practices in the South by Black people, and that to me feels like a joke, which then in turn a lot of other kind of, you know, commodified Black genres are kind of working in the pun. Back to the church, you know, like people are running around and speaking in tongue, but we're also reading, you know, European texts that are affirming, you know, slavery and genocide, to keep it as buck. But that to me is really interesting, that you can find a way to reconcile it, and you kind of end up yelling, or, you know, speaking in tongue might be another kind of laughter. I'm really interested in the kind of bisociation effect, these two things trying to make sense together, which then I go back to the braid. And I kind of want to do that, if that's cool with you.
Yeah. What is a concrete pun, or like what's the
like a concrete pun is a psychological reconciliation between two spiritual beliefs.
Okay.
So in the piece that I was reading, the example was Saint Patrick and I think it was Legba, which, you know, they both have snakes, and because Catholicism was a very visual religion, and for the most part, Black churches aren't very visual. So New Orleans is really interesting that it actually does kind of have some sort of development in Black culture around the religion, but it was mainly used, again, these candles or these saints were kind of used as like signposts to actually point towards a deity or Loa that was actually believed. Because if they did do it openly, then, you know, okay, we got to get you out of here. You can't be practicing this stuff. You know, Marie Laveau's doing her thing in Congo Square, and we can't have everyone else do that. So, you know.
I love that. Before you move on to
Go for it. No, do you think?
play some music, is that what you're going to do?
Yeah.
Felt that coming. I'm just going to read something written by Ralph Lemon that's in one of his paintings that were part of his retrospective, which kind of helped consolidate a lot of, speaking of someone whose like entire practice is like a concrete pun, like Ralph is. He wrote, I dreamed I was dancing among my enemy. The problem was to keep the thought patterns in the movement intact while remaining just below the threshold that would get me wiped out as a heretic.
Totally.
And so this, like, it makes me think of the Loa kind of remaining below the threshold, like in the sort of like syncretic ceremony or something, that there's a way in which this spirit can be most active and do its most work when it's not necessarily manifest in the way that like a visual religion like Catholicism might do, but it feels like that's edging in New Orleans somehow.
Totally, yeah. Camouflage, and this is such a city of camouflage. I'm thinking about all of the storm shutters or in the French Quarter where like the interiority is in the interior, and oftentimes, you won't even get a sense of people living lives in those homes because they're all kind of tucked away. Obviously foliage, marronage, comes up. It's like the ability to blur into the environment, whether it's willing or not, by your own volition or by the environment's volition. I find it really interesting that, we tend to mimic or model off of the flood. When I think about the second line, or when I think about a parade, it's kind of, it's sort of like flooding the streets and inscribing the streets through meaning repetitiously, over and over again, without words. The culture has kind of made its mark on the city spiritually. And so the parade, not even just the steps, but the parade kind of becomes a drum beat, some kind of signified rhythm for the city, seasonally so. I'm even thinking the rhythm across the calendar, not even just like acoustically through space. But yeah, I wanted to play a couple songs, and to speak of mediation, these are two songs coming from Detroit, and I love that Tom Dent spoke to it because I also feel a bit of a tension there. But I'm really appreciative of thinking about the mediation of technology and the mediation of assembly, where initially down here, there was not a lot of mediation here to extract resources from, or by the labor of Black people. You're just in the crops picking, and then the industrial is doing the same thing as the agricultural, but there's a kind of mediation between the two. And so the space condenses into factories, into assembly lines, but the notion of parade or the notion of, camouflage, how do we share our truth to each other without other people like really tuning in? I think of, this is more Chicago, but house, and then for Detroit, techno as a sort of, as a parade forced into, basements and Ford factories. Like if the ring shout sort of was expanded out in the procession, and then the music was in the air, by the time the Great Migration happens, there's a kind of Ouroboros effect where then it's returned back into a different kind of plantation or the plant. And those technologies is no longer like these, African-derived instruments like the banjo coming from the gourd or obviously the drum, but it gets mediated into certain synthesized sounds. And I'm just kind of obsessed with that historical phenomenon of Black culture somehow figuring out, improvising how to carry on through multiple catastrophes. I could say a lot more about that because it kind of freaks me out if I think too hard about it. So maybe we'll try to do that. But for the moment, I want to play two songs. And did I even say the names? Yeah. One's called High Tech Jazz. The other one's called Parade. And I feel like those titles are very emblematic of a kind of Blackness or assembly where we can kind of feel the parade enter the sequencer. So I kind of wanted to sit with y'all and listen to these two tracks.
Is this Detroit or?
Absolutely, they're both Detroit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hear that? The drum is playing, bouncing.
Yeah. Oh, that's someone in. Okay, thank you. All right. Okay.
Hey now.
Okay. Okay, also, check. Also, that second song was also Timeline, not Parade. That song had a weird sort of syncopation that I was like, no, I don't know. So I played that one instead. But I think both are there. I love hearing the sociality. You were talking about how laughter is like the engagement with the mind and the body. And I think that's so much of Black dance music, Black social music is also like, okay, this doesn't work until that connection happens. And I feel like when you get like, if you hear in the crowd, people sort of like excising out, I feel like that is the kind of laughter of like, okay, this worked. This sounds good, you know? And I think that when you hear a laugh, it almost feels like a declaration of some kind of truth, you know, like, okay, yeah, that feels right. Yeah. And you have no other way but to let it out.
Yeah.
But to that point, talking about abstracting the idea of the parade, I wanted to know if there were, I know you got roots in Georgia, you're staying out in California, but also the South is everywhere. I was wondering how parade, or even just that term, you know, might show up in your world, your experiences. Again, for me, I think of the river as a parade, as an ongoing parade.
Yeah. I was thinking, because you posed this a little bit earlier too. I keep thinking about LA traffic as the opposite of the parade.
The Terry.
Like, just being stuck
Yeah.
in something that looks like a river but isn't moving. And maybe the people who are driving wildly and, you know, basically putting all of our lives in danger,
Yeah.
are also, or are the parade, or like, it's like parade energy, like interrupting what we've all signed up to do, which is just like burn fossil fuels and be stuck on our way from point A to point B. The parade. I mean, I think if the river, the parade, I feel like I'm about to like
That's
do like a slam poem or something, but like I feel
good.
the parade. No, I'm kidding. The I think that there's sorry, I'm sometimes telling jokes when I shouldn't be.
No such thing. No such thing.
I think the parade, I like this insurgentness of the parade. I was thinking, like in the Tom Dent piece, he was talking about how New Orleans was built by Black people, both enslaved and not, and how once these edifices were built, that became the kind of built environment of the city, that the parade became the way to flow life through it, that couldn't be contained by the buildings, or I imagine, or I project that that's kind of the thing, the outlet it served, that parade is like a kind of outlet of energy that is both a form and changing through time and space. So I think of,
Adaptation comes to mind. You know, self-organization. Feels
I mean,
that way.
I
I was just thinking about migration as well, like as its own parade, just thinking about, you know, going from Georgia to Cali. You know, and you being a part of that lineage, you know, back to another line or a second line, even the idea of lineage shouldn't be presupposed within the confines of linearity. You know, like I'm sure you were kind of ambling around, you know, until you found a place to settle. And ultimately I see the Earth acting as a non-Western knowledge system, in that it's a great place to pull evidence of there's another way to think about how to move, you know, like physics, geology as a series of like physical phenomena, and how oftentimes like surveyors or geologists or engineers will be like, no, we're gonna like put the grid on a place that doesn't even know what a grid is, you know, or we're gonna put pipes that run through, you know, environments without considering, you know,
there's water here.
Exactly. There's just so many inconsistencies of logic that are really projected onto a land, this land. One as a kind of a spiritual guide for me is this thing called a mud lump or a mud volcano. It only takes place in the Mississippi River, and it's at the bottom of the Mississippi River. It's at the head of passes, which if the toe of the boot of Louisiana is also a bird foot, I mean, people call it the bird foot delta, but then I also think about people calling Louisiana a boot. So like, is there a bird in the shoe of Louisiana? Go ahead. It doesn't make sense to me, but I love the kind of blending of metaphors that don't work. But so basically at the end of the delta, it splits out into Otter Pass, which is at the top, and there's South Pass, which is the middle one, and then Southwest Pass, which where the majority of all the ships kind of, you know, go through the trade. But it's through, well, it was through South Pass that these mud lumps, which is basically, as Louisiana is a deposition of so many varied sediment packages around North America. I don't even want to keep it to the U.S. because, again, the Earth doesn't even understand border logics. It has different densities. All these different dirts and sediments have different densities. And so when you place a very sort of like, you know, soft, plushy, package of sediment on a much harder sediment over time, that soft sediment will get squeezed up and rush up, kind of like how salt domes are formed. If you've ever come across a salt dome, it's kind of like I'm really not trying to use $10 words here, but it's kind of like it's a sort. I'm going to do it. It's a anticlinal structure, which basically is, again, kind of like a dome on top, which is there's salt under the Earth's surface, and because the salt has a different density than the dirt, oftentimes it'll kind of squeeze up, and almost like a mushroom cloud, it'll kind of bloom at the top, and that also happens at the base of Louisiana, Avery Island, where Tabasco is made is built off of a salt dome, and it's actually the salinity that allows for those peppers to taste a certain way. But that happens different places. But the mud lumps is the same practice, except it's just mud from beyond 12,000 years ago. And initially, like in the 1900s, geologists, specifically Fisk from LSU, he was surveying the Mississippi River Delta. He was making like these really wild maps that look like string, kind of flowing between each other, all the different meanders of the river. But he got down to the bottom and was like, why is there, 13,000-year-old sediment right above sediment that was here yesterday? He had no idea. There was no lump because it had been washed away, but he was left with the evidence that this kind of upwelling event happened. And it took maybe like 40 years for geologists to recognize that it's this kind of ephemeral, sediment volcano event that then the river washes away. But I love this idea as a concept because it completely rejects the law, one of the 3 laws of geology, that younger sediment is always going to be on top of older sediment. And to me, if I'm thinking about kind of like a Caribbeanness or blackness, speaking more diasporically, when I hear black, I hear like we were saying, kind of an insurgency, but a conceptual one. So like when I hear the term black music, I'm not just thinking about the characteristics of black music, but also it's trying to question and assert another way of considering music, another way of hearing music, another way of like making sense of music. And so I'm really into the idea of black being away from, I don't know, the corporeal form of the body and more of like, like an not an alternative, but just another way of seeing, way of being,
Yeah.
I don't know what I got here.
Salt bloom. Are they hard? Are they hard structures? Like is the island where the Tabasco is made like an island that is a hard salt island?
And you can stand on it.
Okay.
Has anyone how many people have been to Avery Island? Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's okay, but it's cool. But yeah, it's nothing's really hard here. I mean, things it's getting consolidated.
Okay.
But I think the wetland, I don't know why we're laughing. But the wetland, I love that. The wetland, I love the idea of the opacity of it, and I think, it can stand, but I don't know if you can like build a skyscraper on it, like the kind of loading that can happen. I think it would just kind of diminish. A moment that's coming to mind for me is one of my colleagues when I was doing some field work. We were walking in the marsh, and what was really exciting about it is that you can walk on the marsh platform and you can like stand on it, you can kind of bounce, and you can feel the kind of reverberation on it because you're not really connected to any bedrock. There's no bedrock here. And even getting into the Pleistocene, which is right underneath the Holocene, that's also kind of like a hard clay. But back to this guy, he was jumping on it, and he fell through. And this is the marsh platform. He was like this.
Wow.
And I was really young. This was like, my first year. Like 6.
Okay.
6 feet, And that did not, like that image has never gotten out of my brain because, that would have been a wrap for him if he left. And then you just think about the kind of voidness that's underneath all of us, and how sometimes that voidness like comes back up for us, like, of course, I'm thinking about the flood, and then what would it mean to ritualize or to make sense of it in our cultural capacity? Again, back to Mardi Gras, this kind of like, up this upwelling event that like, we're insisting, there's like an insurgement going on, and that insurgement is coming from a sort of void. I'm just thinking about the diaspora when I say that, but super intense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Salt domes.
I mean, it sounds like a ghost story too, a little bit.
Totally.
Um,
Totally.
which makes you, think of how things that don't fully appear can also be insurgent, or like interruptive. And like, I think for me, so we've been talking about the parade as like this like motion and like this a kind of continuity, or even like New Orleans wavering in the wind, like the way that Tom Dent says it. But also, a lot of what I've been thinking about is how to interrupt movement with photography and chop it into bits. And so I've been doing that with stop motion animation, which, the stop motion animation, as most people may have tried, is that you take a photo of this, you move it, take another photo, you move it, take another photo, you move it, take another photo, and you play it back, and it looks like it's smoothly moving across the table. And you can do that in like Gumby. There's, Wes Anderson is like the height of...
Shout out Gumby.
Gumby, Sylvia Wynter, Tiffany King, Tom Dent,
Okay.
John O'Neill, who's like my research topic in the Hammerstadt.
Gumby and Sylvia Wynter in the same sentence. That's a new one.
Dissertation,
Yeah.
Story.
AI could never.
Search terms. Search terms. Okay, so I think that...
What's your Google search?
Don't
Gumby and Sylvia Wynter. That's hard.
So I think that... so what I've been doing is instead of using like an object or a figurine, I've been using real people. So I'll like have a person stand and then take a photo and then take a... And the thing is that when you play it back, there's all this movement because the person is alive. So they can't stay still.
Right.
And so like what you get in playback is like, for me, I become obsessed with all the micro movements that have not been captured, which for me, when working with Black performers, became this really amazing like escape valve for like their life. Like
I see.
even though we have this video, they were not fully captured.
Right.
And
Fugitivity.
Fugitivity. So yeah, so I don't know, the geologic process of this like upwelling, but that was washed away, so there's like evidence of the upwelling, but also only as a trace or an echo or a geological echo or something. Feels similar to kind of how I've been working with stop motion.
Wow.
And yeah, maybe there's like, and you're talking about it as like an event, like geology has events, that take like millions of years or thousands of years. Oh, and then Mount St. Helena erupts and like the whole face of the mountain falls off in a day. And so I feel like I've been trying to work in these ways that are kind of creepy and sneaky and insurgent in ways that requires a lot of like explanation in a way, but like that maybe at some point it causes like a geyser or like an aha moment for one out of hundreds or something like that.
Right. That's the chuckle.
Yeah.
Right. Back to the laugh.
And I was also I've been thinking a lot about absurdity and like revolt and thinking a lot about Camus, who links me to Ralph Lemon, because one time Ralph Lemon did a performance where he does this a lot, actually, where he like reads from books, and he's like screaming and people are like playing music and trying to like throw the books that he's reading into the audience.
Okay.
And so I caught one, and it was The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, which is like written in 1942 and is this existential novel that's thinking about suicide. And is suicide a reasonable response to the fact that the universe doesn't care that you're alive? So I'm just going to read a quote that this is sort of, okay. Camus claims that the realization of the absurd does not justify suicide and instead requires revolt. So when encountering things that are absurd or frustrating or maddening, that you must respond with revolt, because the reasons why things are maddening and frustrating is because there are logics at work that you're sort of told you have to understand, and you don't have to understand them. You can just choose to, to kind of resist through a nonsensical gesture or something like that. We're getting to these instruments on your table. And so he says, actually, the beauty of Sisyphus is that, Sisyphus is this myth where, there's this kind of person who's cursed to like roll a boulder up a hill, and every time it gets to the top, it rolls back down, he has to go, blah, 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 and that, this struggle is something, we should imagine Sisyphus happy. That the actual kind of work of struggling to kind of engage with a difficult thing is a sign of life too, in a way. And that there's a lot to be made of that, even if we never get to the top of the hill. Or is the top of the hill where we're going, or is it the process? You know, is the insurgence like the actual slow roll? You know, because once you're at the top of the hill, you reach stasis and like monumentality, which
this is the circle versus the spiral. You know, like you keep going over and over again, but because you're moving through time, you're going in circles, you're actually like spiraling somewhere, you're actually getting somewhere. Just like the power of repetition is okay, you think you're hearing the same thing, but if anyone's ever spent any time in a club, I feel like you're listening to the music and over time a certain transcendence hits from this overabundance, this kind of overflow of rhythm that like it keeps, by the time you come back to it, it almost feels even more powerful, even when there's nothing has happened. And again, back to the ring shout, like this recognition that through the repetition, something accrues cosmically, spiritually, and that can get you somewhere, that can take you somewhere. And so, back to Sisyphus, African philosophy versus the European philosophy. There's this great book. I'm trying to remember what it was called, something Aristotle versus something. It's by this Nigerian philosopher named Sophie Aluwe, and she talks about the difference between the complementary binarism of West African philosophy and the opposition, the binary of opposition in Greek philosophy. And so she uses this idea of material and non-material, or substance and nothingness. And there's, the classic analogy is the chair, that the chair has a materiality but also has a shadow, and they are existing in two different realms of reality, and they are actually antithetical to each other, both physically but also philosophically. What does it mean for this chair to hold space, and what does it mean for a shadow to not have any space? That's an opposition, but the binary complementary is almost also to bring in other spiritualities like, the yin and yang or Buddhism, is that like you need material and the non-material are actually one and the same. Like without the shadow, there is no chair, and without the chair, there is no shadow. So you actually have to like contend with and make sense of the absurdity instead of, trying to compartmentalize into a logic that satisfies some kind of like preconceived bias of what you think should be real and not real, or subject and other. This very sort of binary attachment to binarism, I think is very prevalent and needs to be considered. And I like how all of what we're talking about is basically opacity, and is willing to mix all of that up so we can like sit together.
So the instruments on your table.
Yes.
Do you have an instrument near you? If you don't, there might be a table near you that has an instrument that doesn't have a person to play it. So if you have, if you have two maracas, maybe your neighbor can take one of the maracas. So speaking of parade, why don't we just all take a moment to like figure out what kind of sound your instrument makes? Just a free-for-all. Also, everyone has an instrument, even if you're not holding one, so you can slap, clap, you can hum your favorite tune. I'm not a drummer. I don't know if I'm allowed to use this. Someone stop me if I'm not allowed to use it.
Someone will stop you.
Someone stop me if I'm not allowed to use it. Someone stop me if I'm not allowed to use it. Okay. Yeah, don't stop. You can use the song as cover.
What happened to were there sticks over there?
There were. Should I?
Yeah.
Camus claims that the realization of the absurd does not justify suicide and instead requires revolt. Camus claims that the realization of the absurd does not justify suicide, but instead requires revolt. Revolt! 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 Okay. Okay.
You want to turn it up?
Okay. I have an idea. I was gonna have them play "It's Not Easy Being Green" by.
Do you have it?
Yeah, I do. On YouTube on my.
Play it out.
Okay. Okay. All right. That was the warm up.
Yeah.
All right. So now we are gonna do. There are a lot of empty seats in the room, so we're going to do a teeny tiny parade, and everyone move to a seat that is currently empty, and bring your instrument with you. We'll shuffle up the room just a little bit. Sorry.
Let me know when you're ready.
Yes, and we're gonna use this song, which, if you're a child of the '80s, you definitely know, but you probably know it. But it's gonna be the song that you're gonna play your instrument along to kind of we're gonna fall into a little bit of a same-songness, and then when that song is over, as you feel comfortable, feel free to stand up and just move around the room with your instrument. Yeah?
I love it.
Okay, cool. So this is a song that was recorded in 1975. You'll recognize the voices, but it was a song that's about, well, I'll just play it. I'm gonna shut up. I'm playing this off of YouTube on my phone, so we'll see if this. Okay.
Can we turn up the mic? Can anyone turn
Oh
me
yeah.
up?
Can this mic get more volume? All right, we'll take that back.
No, go for it.
Okay.
Go for it. Let it rock.
Feel free to accent with your instrument if you like. This is recorded.
Nice.
This was recorded on the Cher Show in 1975. Because there's a guest artist.
You know it's not that easy being green. It seems you blend in with so many other things. And people tend to pass you over. But you're not standing out like flashing sparkles on the wall. Stars in the sky.
Okay, keep playing. Let's maybe stand up a little bit. Move to another chair, or feel free to wander around the room with your instrument. And the stage is part of the room, just reminding you. Feel free to come on up. There's some instruments on stage that need playing. All right, I'll fade this out. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi. Oh, wait. Okay. Okay. No drums, no piano, but everything else is game.
Okay.
All right. Let's explore the perimeter of the room, just the edges of the room. Yes, umbrella. Find the edges of the room. Take your instrument to a far extreme corner of the room. I feel like I'm calling bingo. Bingo. B27. I-44. Finding the corners of the room. Can we lose some lights? Can we lose more light? Maybe that's unsafe. All right. Can we all consolidate on the stage? I'm going to count down from 45. Just you can't use the drums or the piano, but 45. On 1, everyone come on stage. 44. 46. Oh, sorry. 43. 42. 41. 40. You can take your time. You can avoid the stage for another 30 seconds. 38. 37. 36. Maybe we need to clear some of these chairs. 35. 34. 32. 31. 30, 29, 28, 27, 26, 25. I feel like the beat's gonna drop when we get to 0. 22. Now just take a do-si-do around yourself. Hey, take 3 do-si-dos around yourself. 19, 18, 17, 16. Can the room go dark for the last 10 seconds? 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. When we get to 0, everyone's going to take a little solo on their instrument. We're just going to go down the line, and I'll just bring the microphone and give you a chance to do a little solo with your instrument. 5, with a backing track by the incredible Ryan. 4, first solo coming up. Pen and paper. 3, 2, 1, solo. And solo. And solo. And solo. Hey. And solo. Ensemble, yes. And solo. Hey. And solo. Right. And solo. Yeah. Good. Solo. Yes. Good. And solo. Yes. A diary solo. Yes. And solo. And solo. And solo. Yes. Demi, thank you. And solo. Yes. And solo the corner. Yes. And solo. Yes. Solo. Yes. Solo. Yes. Yes. Good. And solo. And solo. You got a cup there. Like, yes. And solo. Yes. 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 And solo. Yes. Knuckle paper. Knuckle paper is a classic. Yes. Yes. My phone. Plastic zombie name. Yes. Yes. No piano. We're not allowed to do the piano. Yeah, but you can do some. Okay, yes, and solo, yes! Alright, solo! Good, and solo! Yes, hand of paper! Yes, a synthesizer! Solo, yes! Yes! Oh my God! Yes! Beautiful! Thank you. Solo! And solo! Great! And solo! Yes! A duet! Hey, what's up? Oh! And solo! Hello! Yes! And solo! Yes! Okay, and solo! Oh, hey! Okay, and yes! See? All these keys are coming! Oh! Okay! Alright! Yeah! I don't know how yeah, cool!
I think that's it.
Okay! Now this, yeah, I don't know what to do now, but who cares?
Yeah. I got it. Yeah, that's great. I mean, how do you do questions? Can we return back to our seat?
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna do a slow Sisyphus fade out. We're gonna slowly move our way back to our seats, playing our instruments. Maybe you take a different seat in the room after this profound experience. Take another perspective, and Ryan's going to accompany us with music, and then we're going to have a
small Q&A.
A little Q&A.
If you want to, yeah.
If you want to. Yeah?
Let's do it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, a little revolt! 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 Alright, you want to say it?
Oh, sing?
I don't know.
No, I'm just
Yeah. Okay, cool. Alright, cool. Alright, great. Then we'll also wrap it up.
Oh, yeah. Gonna let us stop.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? She's like, turn this on. I was like, that's not our fault.
Oh my God. Alright, so I think it's over. Yeah. Alright. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Alright. So, okay. 5, 4, 3, 6, 2, 1, edit. Okay. So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you.
We are
Getting kicked out.
almost done. We
Kind of.
are going to have to parade our asses out of this room very soon. But we have time for 2 burning questions or 2 burning music solos that have not been heard yet tonight. Feel free to fire away. Yes, down in the yellow T-shirt, in the back, white
Can we
T-shirt,
pass
yellow
the mic
T-shirt.
over?
and Yes. Here, we're going to mic you for posterity.
This is a reference to St. Patrick's and Dunbar, St. Peter, Lake. I conform whenever I hear it as the saints were a way to flow through, because I also feel like this syncretic mind saw these forces or these images, and they were like, oh yeah, that's something that I already know. And they assimilated it. It also then serves the role of masking, but I feel like the mind of these people are assimilated as opposed to what we know in the West is like, oh, this is this, that is that.
Yeah.
So it's just a reflection of it.
Yeah. Do I have my mic? I don't know where Mike is.
Well, Ryan's looking for his mic.
Yeah.
I will respond. Yeah, I think opacity, I think about, or like in this conundrum of like defining what we are investing in an image or the energy or spirit behind an image or something. I also think of opacity as like, we are mysteries to ourselves, so how could we ever be transparent to anyone else? And so then, maybe how we consume or attach to things are also is opaque. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess just really quickly, I think that, synchronization, the syncretic kind of, turn that people feel like is sort of is kind of an experiment coming out of the Caribbean basin. I'm always bound to kind of a West African, history and knowledge system. That's where I kind of trace my origins back to personally. But I think when we think about the idea of Yoruba land, or West Africa, it's obviously a bunch of disparate tribes that actually had different cultures, and through conflict and fighting, over time, a lot of their own understandings of the world often blurred. And so I guess the idea of the Creole or the syncretic, turn was kind of always already happening. It just arrived to the West through the African, and from there, because there's kind of a hang up on origin or provenance. They have to find a kind of a 1-point perspective. It's coming from here, when in actuality that origin is already a kind of collage or assemblage of various cultures. So I love thinking about there is no beginning, there is no kind of like pure, singular. There is no one, that we've always already been mixed up. One more question.
One more question. It can't be what is the meaning of life, but it could be.
Can't help you. Is that you, Zach?
Sorry.
I got you.
Appreciate it. Right, I'm a selfish research journalist on this question.
What's up?
Where does, like, in the space of parade, in the philosophy of parade, where does the voice, call and response, song, how do those things factor in?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, a call and response is really special. I think another way to think about it is echolocation, or even sonar. Like by expressing ourselves, we're finding each other anyway. Even in a personal way, I feel that even what's happening right now. So it kind of like fractals out, like if I didn't find my voice, I don't think I would even have met you or really anybody here that I know. Prior to that, I was kind of in a lab, very quiet. But I think speaking up, and expressing yourself, that moment of letting out also happens at a creative or almost like an ontological level. So yeah, the parade is the call and response, because we're also finding ourselves spatially throughout this history of New Orleans, but also the history of parades, the history of making your statement, the history of insurgency. And then obviously that back and forth, like with repetition, only accumulates that energy. The more that we go back and forth with each other, like circulating energy, there's almost some kind of quantum thing going on. So yeah, I think without being here for another 10 minutes, I think there's definitely like a quantum entanglement to the idea of
call and response, to the point where you don't even know who let out the first call. You know, back to there not being an origin. You know, every call is a response, I think. Yeah, which I think New Orleans is doing just all the time. You know, talking back, making a joke, Josin, it's all there. Yeah.
Boom.
That's
last
two.
call. We're done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
for being here. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Will. Thank you.